call the Friday, May 16th Economic Development Plan Review Committee meeting to order. Starting on the agenda, we'll begin with roll call.
Blessam,
Here.
Feldner, Hammer,
Here.
Howe, Neither,
Here.
Nelson,
Here.
Pittner.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And folks, we've got Hannah with us today helping out. We appreciate that very much. We'll move on to the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving on to item 3, approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion of the minutes? Okay, call the roll.
Blessam,
Yes.
Hammer,
Yes.
Neither,
Yes.
Nelson, Pittner.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. On to old business, continuing with our development bullet points in the document. Tyler, did you have anything you wanted to continue with, or did we finish up with yours?
I think we finished up with everything that I had, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Jordan, you had some things that were submitted. Were those worked through, or are there still pieces that you wanted to hit?
I think in large part we worked through some of the higher items that I'd had. So at this point, I think I don't know that we need to go back through what I had submitted back. That's been a bit now. So, but I don't think we need to go back through them at this point.
Okay. All right, then we're open to additional comments, additional bullets, additional thoughts. I have one that I'll get to if nobody has anything they want to add. Okay, so right now we're sitting good with what we've got. So one that I would ask one of you to make a motion for so that we would have discussion on it, because I don't typically do that as the chair. But one of the things that we had discussed earlier on and kind of tiptoed around a little bit is the idea of looking at the Magic Fund Steering Committee, in my mind, the Renaissance Zone Committee, just how do we handle these types of ongoing discussions within the city? And so in terms of a motion, what I would be looking for is to direct the council to reevaluate our committee structures around economic development and perhaps focusing on the Renaissance Zone Committee because it is the most active to have more of an ongoing conversation. So if somebody would be willing to make that motion for the discussion, I would
make that
appreciate
motion.
it. Okay. Is there a second?
Second?
Okay, so Hannah, let's make sure we got it. Did you get what I was? So Paul, do you want to maybe state it?
Again, so I think the motion, the idea is to look at efficiencies through possible consolidation of committees, or, absolving certain committees. Again, we've talked about before, the Magic Fund Screening Committee rarely meets. Is that a bad thing, a good thing? To be debated. Renaissance Zone Committee meets relatively regularly, but there are times where there are meetings where we have to cancel them, and there's no applications for Renaissance Zone Facade Improvement Program applications. Is there a possibility to consolidate those? And we had talked about even having an ongoing economic development committee meeting and committee in the past. I think through and I'll clean this up for you. I just want to make sure that this is the understanding for the committee that does the Renaissance Zone take a new position as the Renaissance Zone Review Committee, the Magic Fund Screening Committee, as well as if there's anything economic development related within the city, the Renaissance Zone and its volunteers or appointed members are taking an active role. If there is a presentation that they want to bring, if there's a childcare issue, hey, how do we come up with recommendations? Somewhat like this body, but we're just putting more on the plate of those committee members. So I would just say make a motion to look to consolidate the Renaissance Zone Magic Fund Screening Committee with an emphasis on economic development.
Okay. Clear for everyone? Yeah. Yeah. So
reinforce my
discussion. Go ahead.
second.
Yep.
And then
And
discussion.
then
Yep.
If we could go to the document, directions to city council on retail recruitment services.
Say that one more time. Which one?
retail recruitment services.
I think this kind of falls in line with one of those bullet points, Mr. Chairman. It says, explore if there should be any newly constructed standing committee on economic development. That's what we're referring to here. So, we might want to either clean that up in some fashion or replace it with this motion that Mr. Pittner has.
Sure. Yep.
Up a little bit further. There we go. Stop right there. Very top of the page. See where it says, I had stricken that, explore if there should be any newly structured standing committees on economic development. So for this document, I think that's what you're referring to, is explore what we can do. And
Yeah, because I think, you know, where my mind was going is, you know, we have, number one, the more committees you have, the more volunteers you need, the more people taking time out of their day, and, you know, if they're not meeting often enough, it just doesn't have the flow that you want. I feel like we have had enough continuity with what we've done so that we kind of have gotten in a groove with where we're headed. And I think the Renaissance Zone probably is the most active because it's got the most things coming through it. And so to me, that's maybe a good starting point with an expanded thought. Now, the other thing that I have, and Harold, I don't know if you can answer this, if Brian can, if maybe Dave Lakefield can, is there anything in ordinance or statute that we got to be careful about? Does the Renaissance Zone, because it's in state statute, does that require its own board? We added facade to it, so I would guess that there's some leeway at least. But anything that comes to mind if we wanted to do some consolidation or suggest consolidation?
I'll let Brian answer the questions about state requirements for Renaissance Zone.
Yes, Chairman Blessing, members of the committee. The Renaissance Zone Development Plan, which the City Council adopted in May of last year, outlines the requirements for board members for the Renaissance Zone Board. I can speak to the officials at the state, see if we can maybe expand that further and have maybe just an economic development committee that's broader in nature and brings in other programs where everything goes before one body of review body before it goes to the city council. So if we're going to amend the structure of our board, we'll have to amend the development plan. Okay?
Okay. Any other questions for Brian? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Brian, would that development plan have to go through the county as well, or would that be just the city?
Yep, it'll have to go through the county and the school board for approval before it goes to council.
Makes sense. Okay.
Chairman, one
Yep.
question from Mr. Billingsley. So what do you feel about that? If they were to merge all of these into one organization, the Magic Fund, the Renaissance, all things economic development, your thoughts?
I personally, Chairman Blessing, I don't have an objection to it. I would prefer that we take members from each organization and put them on the same committee, because I don't have any background with the Magic Fund, nor do anybody from the Renaissance Zone Board. So it'd be helpful to have some of the Magic Fund committee folks serve on this committee as well. If we can just merge them together, I would have no issue with that.
Jordan, volunteer.
Not at this time. I have some comments, not necessarily for you, Mr. Billingsley, but I don't know if you want them now.
Yeah,
Or,
just anything else for Brian, I think we're probably good for right this second. Okay, go ahead, Jordan.
I think, look, I think it's a good idea to find these efficiencies whenever, and I'll be the first to admit, ever the last 3-4+ years, Magic Fund side, like committee, dysfunctional is probably not a strong enough word because we don't meet very often. But we don't meet very often because there aren't very many requests. I'll go to my grave saying that is a symptom of potentially a bigger issue in the city. We don't have people wanting to invest and needing the money outside of the flex pace programs, which are the least restrictive and most available to the small businesses in our community that are already here. Now, when I look at this, these are two committees that are working with two different funding sources, right? Magic Fund is sales tax, which means you've got people outside of Minot city limits that are spending their money in this community, and you have Renaissance, which is property tax abatements and whatnot. Are these the best two committees to join? Now, I get it. Let's not pull brass tacks. It's a Friday afternoon. Like, Magic Fund not being used very often. Committee's dysfunctional. Let's just tack it on to something else and get rid of it. I mean, the way I look at it sometimes, the way the Magic Fund is, if we're not going to use it, why are we taking that money? Why are we charging the sales tax in the first place if we're just going to put it in a bank? And let it sit. And to be able to say, we're going to have millions of dollars in the war chest, just trust us with it. We can't talk about where it's going to go, but if there's something big that comes up, and I get that. I just had seen inklings of a project or a new member investor in the Chamber EDC that's looking at a project in Berthold for using natural gas to create anhydrous, which is probably a fantastic idea. And Berthold would fall within the range of the Magic Fund because citizens of Berthold come to Minot and spend their money in Minot. We like to think, and I think a lot of times they do. But that's not the same thing as what we're looking at with Renaissance Zone. That is strictly Minot. You look at the makeup of the Magic Fund Screening Committee, you have a financial representative, you have industry representatives, you have all of these people. Those are people that are there to look at things in a very different way than, say, the Renaissance Zone, which is more real estate. I'm just wondering, as much as I think we should be hacking and doing a lot of consolidating to gain efficiencies, are these the right two groups to put together? I mean, I'll be honest, I sometimes have and I'm not the greatest at looking at this, but I sometimes have a wonder whether we even need a Magic Fund. Is there a way we can just make sure we get these government programs, keep money in an economic development reserve, and when these one-off projects come in, the council as a whole can look at them and evaluate them and see if that's something that they want to do? The problem is, a long, long time ago, long before I even lived here, probably before I was even alive, they created a city code, they codified the Magic Fund, and I'm pretty sure the screening committee exists because of those requirements. And that might be a question for the city attorney. Can that be done away with? If it can, I don't know, we have one meeting every 2 years. That is what it is, I guess. But I think there's some bigger level questions for economic development. And as a person that buys a lot of things in Minot and pays a lot of sales tax, I'm not so sure that paying the sales tax I've paid the last couple of years to just let it sit and earn interest in the bank is the best way to use that money.
Paul?
So I have a question for Mr. Lyman, if you will, and Mark, as you approach. And again, I agree with Jordan, there's not a lot of applications to the Magic Fund that at least make it to the screening committee. Rough number over the past 24 months, 12 months, how many individuals have expressed interest in the Magic Fund but that maybe not have fit? Shot from the hip.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, spoke to one today. A lot of people just aren't sure if they would qualify. So I probably have 10 to 15 conversations a year, significant conversations, more than 5-minute conversations about the Magic Fund with a business owner.
Sure.
But maybe 1 or 2 of those are people who, under sort of classic rules, might qualify. Now that we're doing a lot more with FlexSpace, I can use that as an explanation for your sales tax are supporting through the Magic Fund, through the administration of the Magic Fund by the city, to go towards FlexSpace. And, we're maxing that program out now. They're actually, they probably could use that another $250,000 by the end of this year. That program is getting well used and has for the last 4 years. And that is a big chunk of Magic Fund right now. That's my best guess from the hip.
And that's all.
Yep.
If I may continue. And again, Mark, unless somebody else has got a question for Mark, I'll let you sit back there.
Jordan
Well,
does.
I think
Okay,
the big
Jordan.
thing, I hope in what you guys just heard, we didn't get that we shouldn't be allocating the money or anything like that, especially for PACE and Flex PACE. I mean, those dollars come from Bank of North Dakota Capital. Now they're appropriated but out of Bank of North Dakota reserves, which Bank of North Dakota is owned by the state of North Dakota, which means it's owned by the taxpayers, which means if we don't have a venue or a vehicle to get those dollars, drive those dollars to Minot and this part of the state, then Fargo or Grand Forks or somebody else takes them. Well, that's our money too, as taxpayers. You know, I think those dollars, we gotta keep them up here. And I think that's a good thing that's run under the Magic Fund. But I mean, even traditional PACE, which is primary sector, we haven't had a lot of requests. And the biggest question I've had on the committee, there are a lot of things that run through that half cent that we don't see. And those reports are coming to you guys on the council, I'm assuming, as far as, okay, we had 14 applicants for PACE loans, 12 of them, or 14 businesses indicated interest, 12 of them didn't qualify, one put in an application but was incomplete, one is being forwarded on to the screening committee. I would think if I was in your guys' shoes, I would want to know that, especially since it's your budget that's funding this stuff. Yeah. That's just my thoughts. And you know, don't get me wrong. I am actually a believer in what the Magic Fund's trying to do and what good can come of it. But I'm also a believer in transparency to the nth degree. And the thought process of we're going to take millions of taxpayer dollars and sock it away. I don't know if I was you guys on council, if I could stand for that. That's a hard sell to the average Joe or Jane in town, when that money could be used for one of the gazillion dollars of infrastructure things that you guys are going to have coming down the pipe.
Mark, one quick question for you, along the lines of this motion. I'm not necessarily sold, for the reasons Jordan talked about, that, oh, we have to consolidate these two things. I don't want anybody to take it as that's the only path. But I do think that there are combined efforts that this committee has kind of edged up to in a few spots, and an ongoing conversation that needs to occur. And so from your perspective and, you know, just the experience you've got in it, is there some value in what we're talking about here? You know, it doesn't have to be the combination of those two, but I think this ongoing conversation is a good one. And I think it is something we want to stay on top of and have continuing thoughts of, hey, here's the feedback we're getting. It doesn't fit any of our programs. What else could we do to make that one work? You know, that kind of thought process that I don't know if we have that going on today unless we stand up a committee like this. So what would your comments be to that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, your question is there value in having that conversation? I think I'm always open. I think our MSC EDC is always open to the opportunity to discuss how the community would like to do economic development. There are certain pieces, I think, of economic development that seem to work and flow nicely and efficiently. The Renaissance Zone Review Committee seems to be one that has had a lot of good work over the years and good direction there. I think that having that conversation and having that at the right level with the right people makes sense. I don't know what that would end up being. I don't think that there is some magical committee we haven't thought of yet that it's just going to kind of appear as a result of this. So I don't expect that it'll be a 1 + 1 = 2 sort of conversation, if that's helpful at all.
Yep. Paul, did you have something for Mark?
Nothing
Just
for
to
Mark.
continue?
Nothing
Okay,
for Mark.
thanks, Mark.
And Jordan, your comments I agree with wholeheartedly. Back in 2018, right? Like, do we really want to be shoveling money into a magic fund that it's got that check valve on it. Once it goes in, you can't get it out, right? So that's why actually I don't agree with the comments today, because when I first got on council, my first budget cycle, I made an ordinance change that passed for the city to take an active role and for the city to be able to invest in economic development activities. So again, that 15% of that penny isn't just going into Magic Fund. It can go into Magic Fund, or it has gone into things that the city has deemed as economic development activities, whether it's the facade improvement program, which, agree with it or not, there will be revisions made to it, is visually working downtown. Wayfinding signage, whether you agree with it or not, visual improvements, beautification of our community, economic development professional position. This committee has decided to go away from that. Retail recruitment, those dollars go to pay towards retail coach and retail recruitment into the community. Flex Pace was actually one of the primary programs. The reasons I wanted the city to take an active role in economic development was because we couldn't tap into that program because we didn't have funds that were dedicated to those programs. Only Pace, only primary sector. TRRF, Tourism Recovery and Resiliency Fund, a byproduct of the coming out of the pandemic. How do we restart our economy? How do we get people to mine it? How do we drive sales tax numbers up? So those are all things that have been done in the purview of economic development from that, instead of just dumping them into the Magic Fund. Instead of just pouring money into the Magic Fund, waiting for that big home run call center, primary sector, egg value thing to come to mind at. Again, those were my frustrations, and I think the city has actually done a really good job of shifting away from that. However, I caution from doing away with the Magic Fund, and I agree with the comments. Having those conversations is a good thing. You don't want to undercapitalize those opportunities. I think that's a cardinal sin, is that if we go away from those things and we start shifting money away from those things, that when we do have those opportunities that come and knock on our door, it says, well, geez, I wish you were here 4 years ago when we were still investing in the Magic Fund. So I want to draw attention that the city actually has, and just even for the public to know that the city has taken a different, more progressive role in economic development, saying, let's try what works. And I do believe that if you put the right people in the room in a consolidated committee, and I'm not even saying that's the way we should go, but again, I think it's a conversation that's worth having, because if you find that consolidated effort and people say, hey, we see a gap here, who do we go to talk to at the city? Who is going to provide a recommendation versus someone that has an idea? Maybe it's Surf Space and Planning Council that has to bend the ear of a council member that says, hey, can we do this? Or Visit Minot, or the chamber that says, hey, we have an idea. How do we get rolling on this? How do we get this to be come to fruition? So again, I can see the efficiencies, but again, I think it has to be an appropriate conversation, and it has to be the right people in the room, and it has to have the right partners in the room that are all kind of rowing the same direction.
Jordan?
And Alderman Pittner, maybe I phrased this misleadingly. I don't know that we're that far off. What I'm saying is, when I go to the once a year Magic Fund meeting, we get a report on the financial statements of the Magic Fund, but it's not the Magic Fund. It is, to what you said, it is the consolidation of all of that, of which the actual Magic Fund, that's really a smaller and smaller amount as we haven't met. There are line items on the balance sheet for loans receivable and facade. There's a line item on the balance sheet for the port. None of that is anything that the screening committee had anything to do with. I've often wondered, no offense, I don't know why we even get it, because it's not in our purview. What I'm saying, and I think maybe if this is the route we're going to go, I mean, maybe you just do have the one standing committee for everything economic development. And then based on the amount of time and energy and effort it's going to take, probably don't call me, because it's going to be a lot of effort, and I am just a volunteer. Because you're going to have there's planning and zoning, where does it stop? Would planning and zoning and Renaissance Board be better together? Those are two things that are kind of related. We're taking two things that are not really related, other than they kind of have fallen under the purview of this committee. I don't know. Maybe if you do stand up an economic development committee, if there's a way to get rid of the Magic Funds Screening Committee and just have them take it over, do it. Or if it's only going to be something that anybody's going to ask money for once a year, just have the council do it and skip it. I mean, you guys are the ultimate decision makers on it anyways. And you have the chamber chamber EDC as a partner that's taking on a more active role than they maybe were in the, at least statutorily, in the last set of bylaws. I mean, just do two legs. Chamber EDC, getting the application to the public. City council, act on it.
Dave, did you want to add something?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, lots of different items here, and I'd like to address a couple of them. I do have some concerns with the combination of the Renaissance Zone Board and the Magic Fund Screening Committee. It's not that they're apples and oranges, it's kind of like they're oranges and tangerines. They're similar in some respects, but very different in other respects. So, like Mark had pointed out, the Renaissance Zone Board is focusing mainly on the revitalization of properties within the city of Minot and tax breaks associated with that. The Magic Fund Screening Committee is a much different purview in my vision, that is attracting new or expanding businesses, and it is strictly focused on economic development, not necessarily redevelopment or improvement in properties. It's a business model. To go on to some of the other discussion about the money sitting in the Magic Fund and why we don't use that for something else, I would argue that I don't think you can, because it was collected under a set of rules, the ordinance that was placed at that time. I don't think you can just make the determination that you can use that for whatever you want to. I've been wrong before, so maybe somebody will prove me differently, but that's kind of the position that we've taken and why we have segregated those funds that were collected prior to that ordinance change and kept track of that, because it's two different set of rules that they were collected under. I would also argue that the point that the Magic Fund Screening Committee is not meeting regularly is a testament to the success of the changes that have been made to the economic development program, because we've moved away from the model of giving people money, a cash incentive or a forgivable loan or something like that, where we hold all of the risk as the city if that project doesn't go forward. We've moved to a model where someone else is taking on the majority of that risk, and we are just buying down the interest rate on that. So if that project goes sideways and fails, we're only at risk for that interest rate buy down. So we are able to leverage other people's money and have a much larger impact with a smaller investment. So we're able to take those economic development dollars and spread them over and have a lot larger impact with a lot less risk. And that has allowed us to take on these other things like the facade improvement program and some of these other non-traditional economic development activities. We wouldn't have been able to do that if we were in the business of just funding that money upfront ourselves. So that's one of my things where a different perspective on that. I think some of the changes that have been made have been successful, and that's why we're not needing to see the Magic Fund Screening Committee meet as often. As far as how the accounting goes, all of this funding comes through that portion of the sales tax collections. So we have a special fund set up for economic development portion of the sales tax. We can't set up special funds for every different type of use of the funding. So it is all included in that economic development sales tax fund, and the Magic Fund is a component to that. So there are some other things out there as far as the loans receivable from the facade programs. They are all in that same fund, but we have segregated the Magic Fund dollars.
Okay. And Dave, is it correct that the way that I think of it right now, under the current guidelines, we're at or very near the cap on the primary sector portion of the Magic Fund anyway? So any allocations that would come from staff recommendations this year are going to be minimal of the roughly, a little over $2 million that's going to come through there. The other things that we have now, the ability to work within that, are the places where that funding is going to go, because we're essentially capped. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. I think the primary sector bucket is over the limit due to the interest that's been accrued to that. So from my perspective, if we are going to make any changes to that program or any changes to these guidelines, let's look where the successes have been. We've limited the amount that we can fund through the bucket in the economic development dollars for things like the revolving loan fund. Source Basin keeps coming and asking. They said they need more because it isn't revolving yet, but they have demand there. We've capped it at $250,000. So maybe that's something that we would want to take a look at. Instead of capping it at 25% of that bucket, maybe it's a different number. There are some things I think we could change to make this better and more effective, but I don't think that we just need to throw it all out and start over.
Okay, Jordan?
So, question, if the success of what we're doing now has led to the only requests being buy downs of interest, well then why even have the buckets for anything else? Like why don't we just make sure that we're fully funding PACE, flex PACE, those buckets? And if that's the case, I would imagine if you get a significant request, I mean, what I'm saying, and I will go to my grave saying this, is that we haven't had a whole lot of requests, or at least credible ones enough to get to the table, that have asked for an actual forgivable loan or anything like that over and above the interest buy down. But that means there hasn't been any actual projects. You know, I mean, you look at some of these things. If I'll use an example like a urea plant in Castleton, or like something of a large scope. I mean, a lot of the requests we've seen in the screening committee have been $150,000, $350,000. Like those are pretty easy. But you know, when was the last time we saw something that was going to bring 500 jobs? Or the last one was Trinity. And we know we can talk about that at Ebenezer's after the meeting if you wanted to. But like, what I'm getting at is if we're going to be so infrequent that for anything over and above these buckets for PACE and flex PACE, which I'll be the first to admit they're great programs. And we need to keep doing them. Well, why don't we just keep a reserve for economic development? Call it a kitty if you want, but I mean, there's governmental accounting standards that, dictate it. And then you have it if something would come up. But why stand up a Magic Fund screening committee if you're not going to use it?
So I guess the question I would ask for the committee with the motion that we have, I think it's flexible enough that the council can have some of this discussion and look at exactly what you're saying, Jordan, because it may be that the answer is not to have the Renaissance Board take over that. It's to have the council itself just do it in combination with the Chamber EDC. I mean, that might be the smarter way to go anyway, because that may just be a step that's not required under the way that we do things. But I think the motion actually allows that, right? It talks about consolidation. It talks about, working with these committees. Because I'll just go back to really my main thought here is not necessarily that we combine those. That was part of it. The main thing is I want this to be an ongoing conversation. What's working? What isn't? What should we be doing next? What should we adjust? Because I don't want us to be stagnant with how we're approaching things, and we need to move when we're getting feedback, whether it's from Mark and team or wherever that's coming from, that we're able to be agile and move on to the next thing. So Paul, did you have something?
No, again, I just to that point, we used to meet 3 more times than we do as a council. We used to have a committee of the whole. We would meet, we would go through the entire agenda, and then we would meet again as a city council wearing a different hat, a different title, and we would go through the exact same stuff, and we would make the exact same motions and have the exact same votes 99% of the time. So maybe if again, to that point, if the Magic Fund Screening Committee is meeting once a year, I as a council member have no problem meeting 1 more time a year in order to handle that.
Yeah, Jordan.
Yeah, and however you guys go, and I'm just going to say this for the record as the former chair, which is I'm okay with that. I regret that we don't meet more. I wish there was more going on. And I wish there were more things moving and shaking such that the screening committee was actually had a place. And I know this came up when the guidelines were rewritten. Like, you'll be shocked to know that there was nobody on the screening committee that made it onto the ad hoc committee to rewrite the rules. And we wonder why we don't have any place. And that's too bad in my book. But as it stands today, you know, things evolve, things change. I mean, I don't know, as somebody that's been on the committee now for several years, I don't know that there's a place for it.
Tyler?
Chairman, I think the funds are set up as they are intended to be, and they're set up correctly. We got 10 million bucks in that. Everything else is flowing over into these other buckets that are facilitating all these other programs. So, and let's face it, we got a war chest there. If somebody needs to come and use those dollars for to get a big, large company to come to Minot, we have those dollars available, and I think that's going to be very important. I think we should keep it as is. I would hate to, for us to up here say that, oh, we need an initiated measure to stop funding the Magic Fund. I don't think that's a sentiment that we want to send. So I think it's the funds set up as they are intended to and are set up well.
Jordan?
But at the same time, Tyler, I don't know that I think it's necessarily the healthiest for a city to be in the business of collecting a war chest to maybe use at some point down the line. I mean, I would tell you, I guess, and this is to a bigger picture issue. When I look at the narrative around government as a whole, I don't think anybody in the majority has a mindset of wanting to grow government, whether it's growing it by people or growing it by dollar amount, size of budgets, whatnot. If we come back, and I know we had a good run by and far, at least I did personally, as far as property taxes on my house this year. But if we come back a couple years from now or next year or the year after, and I know that I think we're limited to 3% increases, something like that. But we get 3% increases every year. But that budget for the sales tax penny, because of the legacy funds that we apparently can't do much with, unless it falls under the old buckets or the new ones, or the interest grows, and it's say 10, 11, 12 million dollars, but residents are eating 3% every year, plus valuations changing and whatnot, or services getting cut. I won't be envious of you guys on the council having to have that discussion. I think you should look at having some type of a reserve, but I don't know that I'd want to see it grow a whole lot. Not until we see that we have a demand for those things in the first place.
Well, and that, just to kind of follow up on that, Jordan, I had parts that I had in the document for discussion for us, and, Beth made a motion, we passed that motion to remove it. The thought process that I had was, in a world where we've got so much pressure on not only the general fund at the city, but infrastructure funds and flood and everything else that's going on, the pieces that we are actually foregoing in property tax through these programs like Renaissance would be a great opportunity to be reimbursed back to the general fund through economic development dollars. That's the reason I put that there, is exactly what you just said, because that is what I hear from the public sitting on the council.
Well,
Okay, and that's why to me, that was a legitimate way to look at this, to say, yes, we need to do these economic development things. A way for me to get my mind around it is that it's not spreading it to everybody else to pick up the cost. That's what we're doing right now. It's the same thing we ran into when we had the childcare discussion on council. It's not that the city gets by with less money when we forego property tax. We just get it from everybody else. Everybody else picks up the slack.
Yeah, and that's a separate or another question to what you're saying is how much of, I'll use the term, how much of a bank does the city want to play? You know, taking and putting pressure on your budget today for hopes it picks up tomorrow, and that's probably a separate discussion point. I think we're in the same thought process, but maybe from a different place. Frankly, I wish there was more requests, and I wish there was more public requests, and I wish that would show to me that, hey, we're moving and shaking around here, and I don't doubt that we aren't moving and shaking behind the scenes, but somewhere along the line between step 1 and 876 to getting things across the finish line, we're running into impediments. We have to be. I mean, I'm sure you guys, like you said, you're talking to people regularly. And there's the interest there. But for whatever reason, we don't get to the end and we don't get to the finish line. And there are a multitude, and honestly, most of them are probably, a lot of them are probably on the applicant. They're asking for more money than they can possibly support, or they're asking for more, you know, it's not the right fit or what have you, or there's a better program or whatever, you know. I wish there was more of those types of deals. I go to other cities and frankly bigger cities, and you see all this big building and the jobs that are coming with it. And we have problems with job requirements too. I mean, our unemployment rate is pretty low. And if you have a low unemployment rate, you're actually constraining your economy because you don't have enough workers to get the jobs filled in the first place, which is why we come back with things like daycare and things like that. Because if people can't find those things, whether the system's broke, we could have a great afternoon at Ebenezer's. We could talk about all of these things. And I pick any of them down here. Like, I don't know that if we're not gonna use these things, then if this is the reality and what we think is going to be the reality going forward, is it just easier to just act on them as a council the one-off time it comes up?
Carol.
If I may just kind of scale it back to a little bit more general. First and foremost, this isn't a tax that was imposed by the city on the taxpayers. This was approved as a ballot measure that the voters said economic development is important to us. We understand that we need financial resources to do that. So we agree to a sales tax to support this, that this percentage of sales tax is going to go to help grow more economic development growth. And they've entrusted the city council with the decision-making and the guidance of how that money is invested for economic development going forward. Now, obviously that was approved a long time ago. Maybe the sentiment of the public has changed, but there's mechanisms in place if that's the way they feel that they can put another ballot measure on to be able to do that. And then to talk briefly, and I agree that it's not the city's place to create a war chest, and I've been on the record of advising against that since I stepped foot in as the city manager in this. And this is why I think it was important with Alderman Pittner's efforts when I first got here of trying to revisit the Magic Fund guidelines. But we wanted a balance there. Right now, we're looking at it through the lenses of what we're experiencing right now. Okay, which is not a lot of applications, not a lot of interest. But I can also tell you that there's some projects in the works right now that can change very quickly. And then you're going to be at a point that you don't have $10 million sitting there and you have nothing in that account to attract the next project in. And that's why we try to build the guidelines to be able to adapt and change as those come forward to the community. So that there is a cap, so it doesn't just sit there and continue to grow and not get used. There's a cap to how much we're going to let sit in there. But then there's also mechanisms that if that gets spent down, of how that gets rebuilt back up. And what is the priority through that? Is it a perfect system? No, but I don't know if there's a perfect system that exists out there. And it's built to adapt to the needs and
really what the council determines on behalf of the community to be economic development priorities, right? It could be workforce development. It could be childcare at this point, right? The guidelines were built to provide that flexibility and that adaptability, but also provide some structure that it just doesn't come a free-for-all grab that whoever wants it can come and ask for it, and we spend it on things that aren't a high priority, that we miss the opportunity of some high priority big project because we piddled it away on little things that just don't really have an impact or matter. And we're trying to balance all of that within the guidelines. And so this is a very fruitful conversation. It's an important conversation. I hope a lot of the public is paying attention. The last point I'll make is, having served several different communities and things, in order to be successful in economic development, what I've seen and observed over my career is you need to be in the right place at the right time, and you need to have the right people with the resources to be able to respond quickly. Minot is the only one that I've been a part of that has the problem of still trying to figure out how to be at the right place at the right time and have the right people in place, but has an abundance of resources. Everywhere else I've been, we've had good, willing people, knowledgeable people, and we've been in the right places at the right times. Those opportunities have come to those communities and those organizations, but they didn't have the resources to respond, right? And trying to figure out how to come up with $500,000 or $3 million to make a project go can be very difficult for a community. And my final point will be is that economic development is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You plant seeds, and some of these projects will take 2, 3, 4 years. And I've been very appreciative of the efforts of MACDC over the 4 years that I've been here. They've been restructuring, they've been reprioritizing, and they've been recapitalizing on being able to be a good partner to make sure that we have the right people at the right times in the right places so that we can capitalize on these resources. And I think that time is going to come soon. And again, the situation is going to reverse. You're going to have some successes, and those monies are going to be invested in some very important projects. And then we're going to be focusing on how do we rebuild that so we're prepared for the next time those opportunities come forward. I think it just takes a little bit of patience.
Mr. Chairman, too, if I can I concur with City Manager Stewart. We can't drive this car down the interstate by looking only in the rear view mirror. We have to be looking out in front of us, and not right in front of us. We have to be looking way into the distance. And that's part of the challenge here is a lot of this stuff happens because of confidentiality reasons. There's a lot of things that are churning below the surface that just aren't open to the public. And so not everyone is aware of what's going on behind the scenes. There's a couple of different ways where we can minimize or reduce the tax burden from to our citizens. You know, we can effectively manage our budgets and develop our budgets and be as lean as we can. The next part of that is we need to expand the base. We spread that cost to government over a larger base, and that means less burden for each individual taxpayer that we have. So that's the role for economic development, is for us to incentivize that growth, get that capital investment in our community. The jobs will come with that. Additional jobs mean additional businesses, additional capital expenditure, and it feeds on itself over time. Some of these projects that we're looking at are huge capital investments. And if something like that gets to where we are really going to make that happen, I would argue that $10 million would not be enough to get that over the finish line. And that's not something that we can just turn that spigot off and turn it back on and raise that money immediately. So we have to have something there that's available when these jobs come or these projects come along. And there's different ways we can control that. It's not that we're going to give that money away, but when some of these projects come up, there's infrastructure needs, there's street needs, there's all these other things that come with it. That is typically our role as a city, that we can use that funding to further that and develop that, which is our traditional role, and help incentivize that investment in our community. So to me, that's the importance of having those funds available. It's not just that we want to sit on it and wait and give it away, but when we have some of those viable projects that come in, we have something that's meaningful that we can come to the table with and hopefully get that over the finish line.
Thanks for that, Dave. I mean, the one thing that always comes to my mind, though, when we think of expanding the tax base, I don't know what the period of 2006 to 2015, I don't know that we could do more than we did to do exactly that. And we pay more today in tax than we ever had. And that's the part that's hard for me. I have a hard time buying into the effectiveness of that unless it just hasn't worked fully here. I mean, another place where Minot is just a little broken and it doesn't quite work the way the normal thought process would be. Because I don't know how you go from, say, 33,000 to almost 50 and not have that somehow take over and bring a benefit. Because I think it did the opposite. It brought more burden. It brought more street miles to take care of. It brought more fire and police and everything else that we've got to do with that. So is it still coming? Where is it?
Mr. Chairman, just a couple of points to throw in there in that timeline too. A lot of other things that were being addressed outside of the normal, ordinary scope of things. A lot of deferred maintenance items coming up, the impacts of the flood coming up, the growth all of a sudden, and then of course the rise in rates and costs that we saw associated with things that we do here in that time frame. We also expanded a landfill because the flood had an abnormally, it was shortened tremendously because of the impacts of the flood. And then at the same time, we were required to address our unfunded pension liability issue and other regulatory requirements that came up that said, hey, we have to quantify these things and put them on our books, and now we have to address it. So, and we are doing that. We're funding our unfunded pension liability every year. We put money towards that. So those are some impacts that when you look at those data points, there's other factors that weigh into there that happen to be at about that same time frame that were huge impacts for us. So, you know, I would agree that was a tremendous growth, but there was a lot of other things going on too that worked against us in that time frame.
Okay, Chaz.
I guess I appreciate Jordan's comments. He's obviously in the trenches in the Magic Fund quite a bit, and I would agree with Tyler on his comments of, I think those funds need to be available. I appreciate Mr. Stewart's comments about, I think the economic development is a marathon, and I think it's hard to judge it over a 5 or even 10-year period. And, you know, the growing from 33 to 50, there was a lot of growing pains, but what would 50 to 60,000 be? Is that where we're going to see the benefit from? I mean, I don't know, but there was, I live here too, and I went through the same thing, and I attributed to that landfill being filled up a little bit, going through the flood and those things. So, I mean, I'm happy with economic development the way it's doing. I think we need to give it more time. I think we're judging it too quick, is my 2 cents.
Okay, Paul?
Again, I just, Chair, again, just to reiterate Dave's comments, you know, and Mike, you're saying from 06 to 15, you know, we couldn't do much more for growth and all that stuff, but like we talked about it, the, you know, underfunded street maintenance, deferred maintenance, all those burdens that are coming out. At the same time, 06, I would have been a junior in high school. I'd much rather live in Minot today, and we'd probably have a better case convincing me to stay in Minot than you did in 06. Because of the quality of life here, because of the tertiary benefits of growing Minot, of there being more street miles, yeah, but there's more restaurants, there's more activities out there, there's more people investing in the community, there's a more lively business environment. I remember when they built the YMCA, it was out of town. Minot has grown out to it. You know, and again, we're seeing those benefits. And again, not only is there a financial, we've talked about this at our previous meetings, there's not only a financial success to economic development, there is a quality of life aspect to economic development. It's having the walking paths, it's having the people that want to stay here, it's having an airman come in that gets this doomsday, assignment to Minot where it's negative 50 below for 4 months out of the year and saying, you know what? That actually isn't that bad. When you go to Minot, you got to check this place out. When you go to Minot, you got to go here for this, or this is what I did when I was in Minot. I think it's completely 06 version of Minot. I couldn't have got out of here fast enough. I turned 18 and you couldn't have caught me getting out of town. Now I feel like we have a case to retain some of our kids because of the work that our not only the city has done, but what our community has done and the growth that we've seen. So, yes, give it more time, but I also think that we've seen success. And again, when you grow, that there are maybe that means we do have to pay a little bit more. I would venture to look at other communities that have had a stable tax bill over the past 10 years. You know, What does Deering, North Dakota look like? What does Velva look like? You know, what do those communities look like that aren't growing, that aren't having this increased tax burden, which, yeah, again, nobody likes to see their taxes go up. I agree with that. But there is benefit when we invest in our community and we see that growth. Yeah, we might have to pay a little bit more for it. There's no doubt about it. But again, I see the benefit. I see the benefit, not only that the benefit in the future that may be there, but the benefit that we're seeing right now. So,
Jordan?
I will say to that, Velva is growing, and they've got new housing developments. It's a little more affordable, and you know, it's changed and they've embraced some things as far as they're more of a bedroom community now. But it is a viable option for people to make that commute and enjoy maybe some of the more small town comforts that Minot's losing now. So just on that, on one of the things, Manager Stewart, you had brought up, and it's been a while now, so let me make sure I got my thought process down. Wow, this is the first time it's happened to me. I had a bit of a, it's been a long day.
Jordan, think for just a minute. Let me
that'd be
just,
good.
let me just say one other thing, and I think kind of back to where you were headed, Paul. I agree that I think the city as a whole is in a better place today in terms of amenities and attractions and things that we can do. I think we want to sort of caveat that with there was energy that really drove that. Okay, the tools and pieces that were in place to aid that along the way probably played a part in that. But at the end of the day, those are outside economic forces that drove us for the growth and everything else. Because you don't have entrepreneurs putting in restaurants and putting in things around town if there isn't the demand and if there aren't people coming into town. So it's a chicken and egg, right? They go back and forth together. But that outside influence is what drove that. I mean, that's the key. We might have grown to 37,000 by now, but I don't think it would have been 50. Go ahead, Jordan.
You know, the one thing I was going to bring up, and this kind of steers it back towards the difficulties of socking away a war chest for the Magic Fund versus maybe some of the other investment vehicles we've talked about here via Renaissance Zone, some of those kind of things. The difficulty with the Magic Fund is when you do a Renaissance Zone request or a TIF or any of them, it's an abatement, right? Like you go out, if it's a TIF and bond, and then you pay that back over 20 years. Now, when you're funding from sales tax, you got to have that money right away, right? So like to what you guys are, the fear is that, you know, all of a sudden you go through a boom time and you have 5 $2 million requests, and it's gone, because the minute that thing gets approved, that money it hits the books. Versus you maybe bond for a TIF or a Renaissance Zone, they just don't have to pay the tax back. What I'm wondering is, and I have no idea if this is the right answer, if it's even possible, is there a way, as things evolve and change over time, that you can do a similar type of abatement in sales tax versus giving some request $1 million up front right away? We'll give you your 2% or whatever that amount is for a period of time. And that ties in, the bigger the benefit is, the more spend in town and whatnot that way. I don't even know if that's possible, if it's legal or what, but it would make those it would get towards the problem of hoarding money, taxpayer money, to have for if something comes up. You give yourself a tool that you can still use, but you can be a little more nimble with it versus just, we're going to just hoard this money away as much as we can because we're collecting this half a cent, whether we're using it or not.
You would comment on that?
Yeah, if I may, it's not a bad thought, and I've been in communities where we've done what is called a sales tax rebate agreement. But that typically is only going to work in the retail sector because it has to be a company or a business that actually generates sales tax. North Dakota in general has been pretty averse to using tax incentives for retail recruitment. That's been one of our challenges here since I've been here anyway, that I've observed. And two is that the Magic Fund, the big bucket that we're talking about is for incentivizing primary sector growth, which typically is industrial or manufacturing. Again, it's not sales tax producing. So that would make that mechanism of sales tax rebates very difficult because they're not generating sales tax that you can tie to them specifically. The theory is that they're bringing in additional workforce. And I'm going to go back to the very beginning on how I measure economic growth. For me, you're successful in economic growth if you're increasing the discretionary income of your citizenry. By the time you pay all of your house bill or whatever else and you buy your groceries, what do you have left to spend at the end of the day? And nowhere has a better job of increasing discretionary income than higher paying manufacturing and industrial positions within your community. So by incentivizing them to come in, that then translates into growth into your retail markets and those kinds of things. That then generates that sales tax. And I think that's some of the theory here behind the mechanisms that Minot and North Dakota have put into place.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we can't do a sales tax rebate. We contract with the state to administer our sales tax, and we're only allowed one rate with them. So to have a preferential rate for a different business or several different businesses, I don't think they're going to allow us to do that. The flip side of that, the other way to accomplish something like that would be to collect the tax and then give them that money after the fact. And that's kind of what we do through the Magic Fund, is they go through the process to make the request, and then we figure out if that's a worthy request, and we either fund it or we don't. So that would be the mechanism to do
But
that.
again, so Harold, to your point, the rebates that you've seen in the past is I would assume, based on what Dave's saying, it's a separate agreement that occurs after all that. So they would still collect it all the same way, but there would be something that was rebated back after the fact. Is that the way to think of it?
In the experience I've been in, and I would agree with Dave that it may have more challenges in North Dakota than, say, in other states that I've been in, but ultimately they would have to demonstrate how much sales tax they were generating, and it would be on them to prove that, and then it's all audited and everything to make sure it's accurate. And then once the city receives that money from the state, we would rebate that back if they met the parameters of that agreement. That would trigger that rebate to come back.
And one thing, and Paul, I'll come right to you next, but one thing that a thought that popped into my head, during the discussion around what became the main property tax bill this session, when I was testifying in front of the committee in the House, one of the things I talked to them about was a great way to push the types of things that they're trying to do structurally would be to lower the state's share of sales tax, to go from, say, 5% down to 4%. It automatically, just numbers wise, it would dump $400+ million back into the local economies and leave it right in our community rather than having it remitted to the state. When you're dealing with a state government that, in my opinion at least, is bringing in more than it needs, and especially when they're always going to spend what they have, which is their approach, that's different than ours. That was one of the things that I thought was really important. And so these things around the consumption side of the equation are always going to be interesting to me. In this particular case, it doesn't necessarily leave it in the consumer's pocket. But all of this adding up back to what Harold was getting at, leaving more money in the people's pockets drives all of it. It makes all the businesses up and down Main Street and all up and down Broadway and everywhere work a little bit better. It's just a little more lubricated when people actually have the money in their pockets to do something with. So, Paul.
Yeah, just maybe a point of order. I think we're kind of straying away
Yeah,
from
we
the
are.
intent of the
Yeah.
motion. So maybe if someone would want to make a subsequent motion, I will call the question on this to move to consider consolidating the Renaissance Board and Magic Fund Committee or any other combination to continue economic development discussions.
Okay, go ahead and call the roll, Hannah.
Blessam,
Yes.
Hammer,
Yes.
Neither,
Yes.
Nelson,
No.
Pittner.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Any additional motions, any additional directions that we'd like to go?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry, Tyler.
Yep, go ahead, Paul.
I was here first. I'll maybe ask, what are we thinking is our next steps? Because obviously this is a working document. If someone comes up with changes, but we're thinking, I think from our last meeting, we're thinking that we want to maybe sit on this for a month and mull this over. We can do our own thinking and then come back for one final read through and then send this to council, correct?
Exactly right. So my intention would be following the work that we do today to get essentially a clean document put together and out to everybody. And then we would come back, I think we had said June 20th, right? Yep, so June 20th with final comments, final edits, fixing words here and there, with the idea that hopefully coming out of that meeting, we would have something we're prepared to send to council. That's exactly where I'm headed. Yep.
Okay. So then with that being said, I don't have anything at this point, and
Yeah, if there's any, Tyler, you want to say something there?
I have more discussion. I don't know how we discuss something without a motion, but
Well, go ahead a little bit and then we'll see where we get to.
Robert's Rules of Order, all right. Hannah, did you get that piece that I emailed out this morning? Yes. Can you just pull it up quick? I quick want to discuss one thing that I had suggested that made the final document as residential development. We were talking about that, special assessments, developer tax credits, developer rebates. Literally the day after that I made those comments, Williston came out with, I should say Williams County came out with their program. I'm just gonna summarize a few of those. Williams County is actually giving a developer for single-family residential, they're giving them $25,000 to the developer to be used on infrastructure. Now, this isn't specials like we're talking about, this is a straight grant to their developers to cheapen up housing in Williston and Williams County. So $25,000 grant just for infrastructure. Then the buyers of said homes are receiving $15,000 that can be used for closing costs, buying down points and fees to their mortgages. On top of that, there's a $15,000 grant that can be used for hooking up to said properties. So I'm sorry, to infrastructure via water and sewer. So total program was 1.3 million. So again, I just wanted to make this body aware of some of the things we're talking about. Other communities are actually implementing when we're fighting with housing, especially affordable housing. These are things other communities are using.
So Tyler, I think it's a good discussion. Do you want to make a motion that we would look at something like that, or?
I think, there's already a motion on the, I'm sorry, there's already developer rebates, developer tax credits already in our document.
Okay.
Just wanted to make the committee aware of what other communities are doing.
Okay. All right. Anything additional for anyone? All right, I think we're sitting good. So next steps, then we'll get a cleaned up document out to everybody. You'll have about a month through the 20th of June to kind of get through it, with the idea that on the 20th we would clean it up and finalize it.
Mr. Chairman, to the next steps. Do you mind?
Yeah.
All right. So one of the things you had requested was sort of for us to prioritize these 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera. Do you still want us to do that?
Yeah, I think coming into that, I think that'll be a good final piece of what we're doing as we go through those primary pieces. The other thing I would like you to focus on as well is that the other committee notes that we've got in there, they're a little messy at this point. I think we can get them down to just a couple bullets of other things that we didn't see as, hey, really focus on these, but here's some other thoughts. So I think to your point, Tyler, yes, let's prioritize maybe the order of the bullets, high and low, whatever you want to do, and then focus on cleanup of those other notes. I mean, we may get in there and decide, there's only 2 other things. We're fine putting them as a low priority in the main set and getting rid of the other notes. I just didn't want to lose things off the bottom of the document.
Sure.
Okay, makes sense? Okay, anything else? All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.